So continuing further, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands the Muslims with four things that define their success in the final verse of Surah Al Imran. The first is sabr. Sabr is patience, literally, but it means to keep yourself away from any form of a inappropriate expression of any issue you face. And now, you don't hit yourself, you don't throw things, you don't start screaming and wailing and crying. But you hold it in. Okay. Now, to withhold yourself, right? nafs. That is what sabr is, and that's on three types. The first one is as-sabru ala al-ta'a, that you remain patient on the obedience of Allah. Your ego, your nafs, the shaitan, they will whisper to you different ways to delude you and to mislead you and to take you away from the amal. Sometimes they stop you. If they can't stop you, they delay the start. If they can't delay, they make you hurry. They make you start showing off. They make you fall into arrogance and um, boasting. And they use different ways to mislead you from the ta'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So patience is to remain steadfast and remain consistent and to take the right path in Allah's obedience. That's as-sabr ala ta'ah. The second one is as-sabr ala al-ma'siyah, anil ma'siyah, that you withhold yourself from falling into sin. An addiction you have, get rid of it. And sin you fall into, desist from it. That's the second form of patience that we need to have. The third one is as-sabru ala al-masa'ib, that you need to be patient on adversities, inflictions, problems, issues that happen in life. The second form of success is musabiru, right? And that is that when you face an enemy, express higher forms of bravery and steadfastness. Warabitu, from the word ribat, to protect the frontiers of Islam. Or some explain this as that keep yourself ever prepared against the enemies of Allah. So to be built and to learn things that keep you protected, this is a part of it. And finally, number 4 is taqwa, that in every condition you fear Allah and you obey Him. And this is how the surah finishes. Now, the next surah is Surah Al-Nisa. Surah Al-Nisa is the 4th surah in the Qur'an, and some scholars have discussed the Tartib al-Nuzul, the order of revelation, and they say that this is the 92nd one, but usually that is based on analogy and conjecture. It's not definite, so we don't need to give high emphasis on it. It has 24 rukus, 176 verses, 3,720 words, 16,667 letters, according to the information of some. It's a Madani surah, so it was revealed in the Madani period of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, it's called An-Nisa because a lot of issues regarding the woman are discussed in this surah. A lot of injunctions as far as marrying more than one or not, inheritance, and if girls are orphans, right? Marriage, divorce, a lot of these issues are detailed. Now, mind you, there's no surah in the Quran called Surah Al-Rijal, but there is a surah called Surah Al-Nisa. Islam, the deen of Allah, is the only religion that gives a woman her true right, opposite to what is, propagated, wrongfully, that Islam does not grant women their rights. No, Islam gives a woman her most deserving rights and the best rights possible. Islam is the deen that makes women reach to the pinnacle of nobility. But the issue is that people do not abide by Islam. Right? And Islam is a religion you should take as a whole. If you take bits and pieces here and there will be issues because it's all connected. Now, how does this surah correlate with the previous surah? Surah Al Imran. So, one correlation is that in Surah Al Imran we mentioned Ghazwa of Badr, Uhud, Ghazwa Hamra al Asad, and we know the houses of Ansar, they had many widows and many orphans. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discusses what's the solution when such adversity is faced by women and children. Another way of correlating the two surahs is that Surah Al Imran finished by commanding Muslims to have taqwa, and Surah Nisa starts with the same. However, taqwa in Surah Al Imran was more in reference to how we deal with our enemies, and taqwa in Surah Nisa refers more to how we deal amongst ourselves. Now, what's the topic of this surah that it revolves around? It is حماية الله للمجتمع المسلم في حقوقه وعلاقاته. Now, the topic, what I mean by this, is that main center axis around which the whole surah revolves around. Right? Think of it like a large ground or garden that has walls. That walls is the surah, as we discussed in the first lesson. And the main pillar in between, around which the whole garden or field or ground revolves around, is the mawdu'. So that mawdu' is how Allah protects the Muslim society by detailing their connections and their rights that they deserve to one another. Okay. So let's begin with this surah. Now, there's two Surah Al-Nisa in the Quran. One is Surah Al-Nisa Al-Kubra, the big Surah Al-Nisa, and that's this surah. One is Surah Al-Nisa Al-Sughra, and that's Surah Talaq in the 28th juz. Right? Because both discuss the issues of women in detail, they are called Surah Al-Nisa. And a surah can have multiple names. Okay. The surah starts off by commanding us to fear Allah. And this command is given twice. Ya ayyuhan nasu taqu rabbakum, and then wattaqu Allah alladhi tasa'aluna bihi wal arham. Because if a person has the fear of Allah, that is the way for a person to abide by Islam. You cannot abide by Islam if you don't have the fear of Allah in your heart. What's the thing that stops, right? In the so-called developed countries, a person usually stopping at a red light in the middle of the night, at midnight. It's the fear of the law. If a person does not have the fear of Allah, he does not have the greatness of Allah and His deen in his heart or her heart, you cannot hope to abide by Islam. That's why Allah, the greatest command of Allah in the Quran is taqwa. That's even before salah, right? Despite how it's misconstrued by some. Okay? And it's definitely not character. Some people say, oh, fix your character, ibadah after. No. You must fix your connection with Allah first, then with the people. Right? What I mean is, you need to fix both, but the preference is to the right of Allah. Okay? The Prophet ﷺ first and foremost gave the da'wah of Tawheed, not the da'wah of fixing your character. So you need to understand, it's a very important point I want to make here, that extremes happen in good things as well as bad things. For example, this guy's an extremist. He just goes around killing people. That's an extremism. People know this. People realize this. But a lot of the times people don't realize that there's extremism in the expression of mercy and character and all that. And if anything, any extreme happens, it disturbs the balance Allah's created in the world. You must maintain the balance. وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانِ. Right? So the way Allah has placed everything, you need to place it the same way. Otherwise, disturbances will happen in society. So nonetheless, Allah commands us to have taqwa. And then he reminds us that he's created us from a single soul, Adam alayhi salam, and he created from it his wife, Hawa alayhi salam, and from them Allah spread out many men and women from their progenies. And now that we understand our relationship, that we are all related, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of those who are less fortunate or those who are in a weaker position, like children, orphans, women, weak people. So Allah begins to discuss the right of the orphan, and Allah warns us that we should not consume his wealth. A lot of people, what they do is that they would change the wealth of the orphan, change his assets into a lower form and sell the original assets and get more money from that. You can't do that. That's haram. And especially the ones who become a target are young girls who are orphans. So, in connection to this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then discusses women. Now, in the time of Jahiliyyah, right, the whole world, up until recently, was polygamous pretty much. People would marry multiple women at a single time. But in the times of ignorance, there was no limit to the amount you can marry. A man would marry 10 women. Some Sahaba had 10 wives before this verse came down. And they were not particular about being fair and just with them. So anyone they liked, they would have a relationship and be nice to. Anyone they didn't, just leave her hanging. Neither can she go and marry someone else, and neither can she remain your wife because you don't allow it. And that's a great form of oppression. So Islam came in a society like this, and it mentioned that فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ, that if you cannot do justice to orphan girls when you marry them, that you don't give them their due mahar, or you don't want to give them the due mahar, then don't marry them. Marry women that you want. مَا طَابَ لَكُم. You desire 2 at once, 3 at once, or 4 at once. And if you can't do that, or you fear that you will not be fair and just, then remember, فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدَةً. Marry only one woman. Alright? You can't marry multiple women. So there's a few things I want to point out here, and if we take emotions and put them aside, and any preconceived notions we have, and just looked at things factually. Now, biology and psychology tells us that women are hypergamous, and men, they do desire more than one partner. So, by hypergamous, I mean is that women desire the highest value male, the one who can look after them, protect them the best, give the one that has the highest value, the one who has the most amount of strength, wealth, influence. A woman would like that man more than a man who doesn't have that. Now that's usually the case. That's why a woman, if she follows her biology and psychology, would be ready to become a second or third wife of a man who is very capable. And men by nature, they are the one that's giving the seed. So to spread the human society, men are programmed by Allah to desire more than one partner. It's another thing if they're incapable or they don't do it. But if they remain strong and they are tough men, they would desire more than one. Okay. Normally, again, many people, they have very good wives. They don't even think of getting another wife. They love their wives so much that they don't want a second one, and that's completely fine. Right? But we're talking about nature here, and we're trying to explain a system Allah has legislated. Now, mind you, a woman sometimes becomes a widow. Sometimes divorce happens. Right? Wars happen, and many women are now, they are without men. Now, if a man cannot marry multiple women, then what do you think will happen? If there's a lot of women and they're available and they are active, right, and they desire, what do you think is going to happen? Zina is going to happen. So Allah has allowed marrying multiple women. Now, a man doesn't even have to ask his wife to marry a multiple women. That's another thing whether he should or not, but he doesn't have to. But at the same time, and I warn men on this, is that look, if you do not take permission or you don't make your first wife happy and you do it secretly, eventually your secret gets exposed. And your first wife is not happy, and especially in the so called developed countries, that's a recipe for disaster. Because now your first wife will not be happy, issues will happen, and there will be a lot of disturbances, right? So those who've successfully married multiple women amongst ulama, like I come from Pakistan, so in Pakistan those who've done it, they advise that if you want to marry multiple women, right, if your first wife is happy with you, she will accommodate the second woman. If you're not even man enough to make one woman happy, forget about getting a second one. Right? That's what Allah says. فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا, you can't be just. Now, another thing I want to clarify in adl. Adl is not musawat. Justice and being just and fair does not mean being equal. They're not lazim and malzoom. They don't necessitate one another. For example, a person who there's two people that come you want to give food to. One guy, he needs three breads to satisfy his stomach. Another guy, one bread is enough. So if you give one bread to both, yes, you are equal, but you're not fair because you are not satisfying the need of the one who needs three breads to satisfy his stomach. So Allah commands us to be just, not equal. So you must be fair. What does that mean? You do not oppress any woman and you give her her rights. And that's inclusive of two main things, the scholars explain. The scholars explain that you must be fair and just with them by giving them their rights, but you must give equally in two things. Number one, the number of nights you spend that have to be the same. So if it's two, then two for the other. Three, then three for the other. And number two is um, there's a scenario where a person receives gifts or gives gifts, so that should be equal, right? So the expenditure you give them usually should be equal. These are the two things that you must be equal in. The others you must give them the right. And a man can love one woman more than the other, right? That can happen. That's why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who had 9 wives at once, he would say, "Allahumma hada قسمي فيما أملك فلا تأخذني فيما تملك ولا أملك." Oh Allah, this is my distribution amongst my wives in things that I have control over. So do not take me to task for things I don't have control over. Because the Prophet ﷺ loved Aisha anha and gave her the most love amongst all his wives. Right? Are we going to say the Prophet wasn't fair now? He wasn't just? No. The love that you have for one person over the other is not in your control. But the things that are in your control, you must be fair in. And it's true that most men are not capable of marrying more than one woman today because they are simply not ready for it. And unfortunately, the Western mindset has overcome us so much, right? All these movies and dramas and TV shows, all of those, of just marrying one and one love, and that's false. That's not based on reality. That's not the truth. So, in this law, a man can only marry one woman, but he can have multiple partners. So there's men that date like 6 women at once. So Islam is a pure deen. A man has desire. Islam allowed that desire. The one who created you, put your nature. He made the injunctions for you. He gave you the guidance that marry 4 women. That's the max you can do at once. And be just and fair with them. And you need to be equal in two things. And woman should now accommodate that. Right? Sometimes a husband really needs it. Now, will a woman be happy that her husband, he views inappropriate content, or he goes out and he flirts with women or something, or she would accommodate another partner? This is a very I understand it's a very emotional and heated discussion, but sometimes it really needs to be made. I mean, I get calls from people that sometimes they can't have children with one spouse. Can they marry another one? Like it's a natural right for a person to have children. And sometimes a man is just not satisfied with one. Okay, but at the same time, there's many women who face that the husband does not feel they fulfill their rights. He's not fair, and he's marrying more women. So he will come on the day of judgment, and half of his body will be paralyzed. That's the punishment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept for those who are not fair with their women. So you need to approach this in a balanced way. I said this in the beginning. We need to put our emotions aside when we discuss this, and we really need to be very practical and selfless. Right? When you become selfish in this, then it becomes very difficult. So, anyhow, moving on further, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions the rules of inheritance. Now, in the Jahiliyyah society, men would take all the inheritance and women would not get nothing. Children would get nothing. And that's a very oppressing society. Right? And Arabs would say, كيف نعطي المال من لا يركب فرسا ولا يحمل سيفا ولا يقاتل عدوا. How can we give our wealth to someone who neither rides a horse, can neither carry a weapon, and can neither fight an enemy? Because men have to do all that. Men have the expenditures in control. The woman should get nothing. But this is not correct. Right? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He detailed the ahkam of mirath in such detail that no other hukum in the Qur'an, no other injunctions has been or has that much detail, with that much that much specific information being provided. And Allah also mentions فَرِيضَةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ. If a man gives if a man gives half of his inheritance to his daughter, 1/4 to his wife if there's no children, 1/8 into his children, you're not doing a favor. You are actually fulfilling an obligation Allah placed upon you. Okay. Or maybe I should express this differently as it's inaccurate, that you don't give your inheritance, but the men who distribute the inheritance of the deceased, like brothers and sons, and so on and so forth. Now, when a person dies, man or woman, the first thing that from his assets or her assets that you need to use is you need to use the assets for the burial. Number two is that if they have any debts, you must give the debts, whether the debts are for Allah, like he hasn't fasted or she hasn't fasted, or for the creation. Then, if they have made a wasiyah bequest, then from 1/3 of the assets that are left, you can execute that wasiyah. Number four is then distributing the mirath. Now you would first give the ashab al-faraid, those who have specific portions mentioned by Allah, then the ones who are relatives but they get the remaining, and then if there's anything not left, then the far relatives. So the ones whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions by name and gives them their portions, there's 12 of them. The first one, and four are from men, and mind you, 8 from women. Okay, the 4 from men is the father, the paternal grandfather, the brother from the mother's side, and the husband. And the 8 from women is the wife, the daughter of the son, the sister from both mother and father, the sister from the father only, the sister from the mother only, so maternal or paternal sister, the mother, and the grandmother. Thereafter, the asabat come, those who get the remaining. That's the sons, then the fathers, the brothers, and then the uncles. This is the distribution Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done. Now, after mentioning this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also discusses marriage, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He mentions a command in the Quran that وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. deal with women, live with them in the best way. And inshallah, perhaps in other parts of Surah An-Nisa or in another surah, we will mention some of the ways that a man can be a good husband and a woman can be a good wife. And there will be very important and beneficial points, inshallah. Hopefully we can mention them tomorrow. Allah finishes this juz by mentioning in verse 23 the 12 women we cannot marry. So Allah says, your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, your paternal aunties, your maternal aunties, your niece, whether it's from your brother or your sister, and the women that have breastfed you, and your sisters from breastfeeding. So the woman that has breastfed you, her daughter will be your sister in breastfeeding, and your mothers-in-law, and the daughter of the woman that you have married and you have had the final relationship, like your stepdaughter. Right? If you have not had the final relationship, then you can marry her. And the wives of your sons. And then that you looks like 13, and to make this 12, what we can do is your niece can be one. Niece can be one, whether it's from the brother or the sister. And so therefore the 12th one is that you marry two sisters at once. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited this. And uh, marrying these women will be haram. And these women are maharim and you can look at them. So we will suffice with this, inshallah. And to quickly go through the juz in a quick overview. So the first ruku, it encouraged us to give sadaqah of the things that we love. And some sacrednesses of the Kaaba were discussed and its virtues. Ruku number 2, we were commanded to remain firm and dominant and to keep our hearts united by not only worrying about ourselves but worrying about other people and doing amr ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar. And then this is further emphasized in ruku number 3, where commanding good and stopping evil is highly emphasized. Ruku number 4, the account of Badr is mentioned, and ruku number 5, Allah mentions those qualities that constitute piety. We weren't able to mention them, but they are mentioned throughout the Qur'an, so inshallah we mention elsewhere, and some of it has already been mentioned. Ruku number 6, a very important point, that the Prophet ﷺ is only a messenger. So وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. And if he dies, you must remain firm. So if your Shaykh, your Murshid, your Ustad, someone look up as a father figure dies, that should not be the end of the world for you, because Allah is still there. He was only a means. Right? Ruku number 7, it mentions how we get help from Allah, and it discusses the defeat the Muslim faced in Uhud. Ruku number 8, we are warned against the tricks of the hypocrites. And we've already mentioned the hypocrite again, so we didn't need to detail it again. And Surah Tawbah is all about hypocrites, so we mentioned quite a bit there as well. Ruku number 9, Allah praises the companions who denounce the attitude of the hypocrites. Ruku number 10, Allah, He denounces the attitude of some people among the Ahlul Kitab, that death is inevitable, and so on and so forth. Ruku number 11, there is an encouragement to contemplate on the creation, and dhikr and a dua is mentioned, and it ends with the 4 qualities of success. Then Surah An-Nisa, the first ruku of Surah An-Nisa, there's an encouragement to respect the rights of relatives, women, and orphans. Ruku number 2, or you can say ruku number 13 in the juz, there are some principles of the mirath. Those are discussed. Ruku number 14, or the third ruku in the surah, this discusses some misdeeds like adultery, some principles of forgiveness, and we are commanded to behave well with our wives. Rukun 15 mentions the maharim, women whom we are forbidden to marry. Now, looking back at the juz, this was just an overview of the content, an overview of how we can derive lessons from its different parts. So, spending the best of what we have, doing Hajj as early as possible, being united as a ummah, taking the responsibility that Allah gave us of Amr Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar, not befriending disbelievers, and reflecting on the losses Muslim faced in Ghazwa Uhud, and that is not following the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imagine a whole battle can be lost. Imagine if your lives are bereft of the Sunnah. Qualities of the people of Taqwa are mentioned from verse 133, 138. You guys can go back and read the translation if you want. We are also commanded by Allah to remember Him profusely, and the qualities of success are mentioned. Surah Al-Nisa, the way we reflect upon it is that you need to be careful of giving the right of those who are on a lower position than you. Because there's a hadith that Musa alayhi salam asked, "Oh my Rabb, tell me the most choicest of your servants." Allah replied, "Man idha qadara ghafar." When he has the ability to take his revenge or to exercise power against someone, he forgives. So he forgives those who are less privileged or those who are low in power to you. That shows your character as a person, not for those who are higher or equal than you. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. We stop with this. Subhanallah bihamdihi. Subhanakallah bihamdika. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.